Yeah. Any other questions from here, from the floor? I'll open up the question to Leuven. Is there any questions from Leuven?
No.
No questions? Okay. Are there any questions from Ghent?
No questions here.
No questions. Was it so complicated then that there are no questions?
No, it was so clear.
Are there any more general questions about this? Question here?
Mark raised the key point in that I think it's not a question that this is a useful approach, but as I sort of alluded to, discussed with Todd over the last couple of years, it has to become more widely available. People are not going to put in the time to learn how to code in Python and to learn these techniques. It has to be developed as a package.
Yeah, so Mark Lake, just for everyone, he addressed the issue that basically this has to be delivered in a package that is usable for people, and that is why this session is a first attempt of that, actually, of first of all letting people understand why we use it and how it can be used, but the next step is for us to then do the following. And so this session was also a bit of a dry run to us to get some feedback, and so I would definitely ask everyone to provide some feedback on how you would see this would be possible. Our approach, as I mentioned, is primarily through workshops, so that even if the package is not fully self-explanatory yet in the first places, we can help you through it in those workshops. The problem with workshops typically is that you have to find people in exactly the same physical location for those, which means it makes it expensive sometimes for people, but we're hoping to run the workshops across the world through the funding that we're applying for, so in different locations. The benefit also is that we'll have to make sure that we train a number of people that are really well trained on it, so that the workshops can be run in different locations as well based on that, so that it doesn't depend on just us delivering those workshops. But yes, an interface that allows you to exactly do what you should be doing without making inferences of not understanding the method is very important, and the papers that we are now working on tend to be towards that. The vector field paper that we've published actually has 5 supplements to it, and pretty much each of these supplements was to explain the reviewer about a basic principle, which has also helped us now. If anyone comes to us with a particular question about it, for example the threshold calculation, then we can actually now pretty much direct them to supplements or appendix C of that particular paper, because that's where we had to explain it for a reviewer who was struggling to understand it. And we were looking into potentially then gathering all that information in a book to basically accompany the it's kind of an explicit user manual to accompany the use of SPM, but as you can understand, you need to start with first explaining the principles of SPM before you can let anyone actually use this tool. So that's what we're trying to do at the moment. If anyone has any suggestions or feedback on that, then always welcome.
Jos, is there a kind of, presumably there's other people than you and Todd and who are already kind of investigating the use of this data in biomechanics, or are there others at the moment? Is there a kind of user group out there, or is that what you need to develop?
Well, the interesting thing is that in biomechanics there is no one else who uses it now at the moment that we are aware of, except for people who were affected by the bad influence of Todd. So basically people are using it, but under Todd's supervision primarily, and it's almost with us the same actually. We are using it with Todd's supervision, but incidentally, at the International Society of Biomechanics meeting this year, the Maybridge lecture, which is a prestigious lecture in biomechanics, was done by Benno Nigg, who's like the current granddad of biomechanics, and he actually, in terms of what he considered as the future, was to exactly try and not do those reductionism presentations anymore of data, and he said the future is towards more clever interpretations of this very complex amount of of data, and he actually threw vector field analysis in there. What he, however, did not do, he reduced every dimension to 0 in his vector field analysis idea. So what he was looking for was this complicated analysis that gives you one value at the end. Now we find that the principle of time in biomechanics is so key that you shouldn't reduce time. So you should present your data in time at least, so your SPM representation should really involve a temporal profile. But then how you collapse your different vector components, because you have not only your 3 degrees of freedom in your knee joint, but you also have other things that are potentially dependent on it. So you can go to a huge complexity of data with n dimensions of data that actually could then be interpreted as one particular factor. But I would say in biomechanics, it's a very novel approach, and it's been very difficult to get it through to people that this is actually meaningful. Even worse is to get it through to commercial developers and manufacturers, because for them it's something that seems to be totally off the scale.
Are there other fields of study that are using it other than fMRI? I mean, there must be kind of
many
statistical kind of
yes, many
forums or fora to discuss these kind of ideas.
Yeah, very, very broadly used in quite a few areas. Yeah.
So are the resources in those areas that we could look to as motor controllers, biomechanists, are the resources that are useful that you found?
Yes. Well, in terms of resources, the resources tend to be very generic. So there's actually a generic, a mathematical group that is, or statistical group that is working around developing the principles of SPM and developing the principles of random field theory and how you can apply it in statistical terms. And so they work on that as a statistical group. But then outside of that, they tend to be very focused on particular applications. And so what we're trying to do is translate any of those findings into biomechanics specifically, because biomechanics does have specific characteristics to its data that is almost specific to biomechanics, I would say, or the mechanical measurement of the human body. So that's where it's important to translate that a little bit into biomechanics, and that's what we're trying to do. Malcolm.
There's a general, I suppose, more philosophical question about this, which is that the original application of SPM to brain mapping, there is a very clear underlying hypothesis about what's going on, that you're looking at activity in specific areas of the brain, which is neural activity. You're looking at a representation of that activity in terms of blood flow, and then you're using statistical parametric mapping to look at differences, firstly within individuals between normally a control condition and your experimental manipulation, which is a deliberate manipulation, not just a random variation of the kind that you might see in experiments where you just choose people and do the analysis. So given that you get an outcome of an SPM analysis on any kind of biomechanical test, how do you see this relating to what's going on physiologically? If we take an example from posture, the stabilogram diffusion analysis and things like that, people have generated these similar complex mathematical ways of looking at the data, but they have rarely, if ever, properly related them to physiology or underlying mechanisms that are meaningful in terms of understanding the function of the organism. And it seems to me that you have a similar problem here, that you can do SPM without a hypothesis, and you can say we've got a statistical difference, as opposed to having specific ideas that you test with SPM.
I think that's a question that I would have to raise to Todd, I think, again, and discuss with Todd. We're always discussing these things on what the real underlying principles are that could basically form a suitable answer to that. I don't think that I would be in a position now to provide a suitable answer to your question, Malcolm. For those people who are on Skype, the question was primarily related to, if you do have directed hypotheses, then how does SPM help you there? And I would even extend the question, if you do have lots of variables that relate to each other, then you make your data still abstract by trying to bring it into an entire analysis. And so what we're also trying to do with the vector field analysis is to try and relate to properties of the system that are inherently or in people's minds already related to each other. So the example that I gave was the force vector, for example, but the other example is the 3 degrees of rotation in one joint. But it becomes much more complicated to have a physiological understanding if you start to compare joint moments and joint angles in the same equation. Then it becomes really difficult to interpret really what this means physiologically. And so yeah, those are questions that we're dealing with at the moment. We're even dealing with something called canonical correlation analysis, which also is one of those techniques where you don't just relate one variable with a series of variables, but you actually relate multiple variables with multiple variables. So it's like a multiple regression approach or a MANOVA approach, which becomes very complicated to reduce it towards a physiological understandable question. And that's where I would follow the suggestion of some of physiologists that are prolific in their work, is that they say, if I can't do a t-test, then it's not good work. Well, sometimes I think that's what we need to do, is reduce our question towards it. But the SPM can provide you an exploration. So explore your data without making bias in your exploration.